Hello, I'm Emilie Bellet, founder of Vestpod and author of You're Not Broke, You're Pre-Rich, and you're listening to The Wallet. Every week we bring you the best tips, guidance, and a good dose of inspiration to help you manage your money better. Today's episode is about earning well, but still not feeling wealthy, and the gap between income and actually building long-term wealth. My guest, Philly Ponniah, is a financial coach and chartered wealth manager who works with high-earning women to help them take control of their money and build a system that supports their life. We talk about why earning more does not automatically solve your money problems, how lifestyle creep and financial chaos show up even at higher incomes, and the beliefs that quietly hold people back from building wealth. We also unpack what a good financial system actually looks like, the common investing mistakes high earners make, and the reality of the 100k childcare tax trap in the UK. And remember, the content shared on this podcast and on Vestpod.com is for educational purposes and does not constitute financial advice. Philly, I'm so happy to have you on the show today, and we're going to talk about finances for high earners. So maybe let's just start. If you can tell me, what is a high earner, what is the level of income, and who are your typical clients, maybe?
Well, I know today we're going to be talking about the childcare tax trap as well. So that's people who are earning around the 100,000 mark, but some of the high earners I work with are a few million a year. So it really does depend, depending on how I'm helping them, but anything from about 100,000 up to the millions.
So you think that you may not need this conversation about money because you're earning enough, but I think there's always a big gap between the amount of money you're earning and the wealth you're trying to build. So can you talk a little bit about this gap?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think there's one thing is earning the money and another thing is keeping the money. And before I did my financial coach training, I probably would have said a bit like everyone, why do they need help? They're getting such a high salary. But learning more and more about the psychological side of money has really opened my eyes, and also speaking to the clients I've been helping over the last few years around actually people feeling safe to hold on to money.
Yeah.
So there can be this high level of money coming in, and actually some people by the end of the month, it's all gone out again. And this is, very high numbers. And if you don't understand what's causing that, it will just keep happening. So you may get the next pay rise or a big bonus that comes in and, it all goes out.
So do you think, what's the issue with people still like earning money, but not feeling wealthy?
Well, it depends if they're actually doing anything about the coming in. So if it's just staying as cash, they might see lots of cash in the bank, but they might not still equate that with being wealthy. I think also a lot of people don't even stop to think about what number either is enough or even constitutes wealth. I think we see things in the UK, lots of people love owning a home as one example. So then you might sort of leverage yourself massively and then have a mortgage, but you might not feel wealthy because you're paying a huge amount out each month, to cover the costs of the house. I also think just in practical terms, if you haven't been taught what to do or know about putting money into stocks and shares ISA or having good sort of discipline at the beginning of the month when your salary comes in, then you aren't doing any of the practical steps that lead to building the wealth. So you may have the high income, but if you still see the money in your current account, you're more likely to spend it.
And what's your definition of wealth? Because I feel when people come and see you, they may have a definition that's just based on a number. And then, you've done a lot of work in terms of financial coaching. So I guess wealth is a lot more than just how much money you have on a bank account.
Absolutely. And it's funny because I've only actually had one couple come to me and say, how quickly can we get to £10 million?
Wow.
That's the only people I've been doing this for like 15 years. I've only had one person come with an actual number that they, as a couple, wanted to know how quickly they'd get there. I would say most people don't really know what number they need or want to get to. So in terms of thinking about what wealth is, I think the more work I've been doing with people and realizing that a lot of us don't stop to think about what actually matters to us. What do we value? What are you going to get to the end of your day or your month or your year and then actually say, that's been a really good month. I've lived intentionally and I've lived how I wanted to live. So, although people come to me about the money, probably one of the biggest changes is actually getting clear on what they want and then where they then spend their time and their energy as well as their money.
So we'll talk about, what to do and where you start and goals, values. But do you think earning more solves more problem or just change them?
Well, you see that a new salary level can cause psychological issues. People might think they're not worthy of earning this level,
Yeah.
but usually the sort of basic problems go away in terms of covering costs, housing, all the sort of basics. But it could be that that's actually a negative message, saying, new levels, new devils, when you reach the next level, you have to sort of keep working on your money mindset, I think.
And do you think at a certain level of income, it's important to work with someone in terms of sorting out of course, your finances, but maybe your taxes or anything else that could become more complicated in terms of estate planning?
Absolutely. And I think a lot of people don't even realise quite often that they need to do a tax return. Most people, I think because interest rates were so low for so long, weren't getting any interest on cash in the bank. And when I talk to people, and I say, okay, you're actually getting quite a lot of interest just on cash, and they didn't realise that they have to declare it. So I think having a team of people, and quite often I will kind of then introduce to different people at the right points of time, where it has been quite useful. And I think I've kind of almost plugged a bit of a gap in the market, not even sort of ignoring the sort of values piece and that sort of thing, is actually around the level of money that people have. Because I found this, you needed a set amount of money to come and get a portfolio managed.
Yeah.
Some people are earning, hundreds of thousands and yet haven't been able to build up that pot to get to the right size to start investing with someone. I know you can invest, do it yourself with a small amount, but actually kind of that gap from starting to getting enough is often, even if people are earning a really high amount, actually haven't yet got enough set aside to start the building.
Yeah, and that's what I realized while, working in banking, and that was one of my reasons for starting Vestpod, is you don't, as you say, you don't have the knowledge, maybe you don't have the confidence. What are do you think the main barriers or blocks for those people who haven't started investing, even though they have money on their cash savings or savings accounts?
Often just an education point, like where do they start? There's lots of different options now. Actually, the fact that it's been democratized, we've got all these different low-cost platforms, you would think, great, people can just get going. But actually, even that can overwhelm people. And they are scared to dip their toe in and sort of almost say, where do I start? So that's just one point. And then I also think there can be an identity piece too. Investing isn't for people like me. I would say that I help a lot of people where they're the first in their family to be a high earner. So if there's no one at home, when you're growing up that talked about money, or you don't think there's anyone around you to ask, because actually it can be quite embarrassing at work when you're C-suite level or, running a team to then say, where's your stocks and shares ISA? I had one person last week who didn't know you could put 20,000 in every year. They just thought it was like a one-off activity. But that's people are a bit embarrassed to ask these things.
And do you think the money story also plays a role? Maybe the messages we've been hearing growing up?
Definitely. That's usually where I start with people. What are those messages you're sending yourself around money? And if you think back to all those sort of villains in all the childhood cartoons being rich, Disney, Cruella de Vil, like the depiction of wealthy people is often negative. So if you've picked that up as a child, it can't help but be there. It's not like you're going to be thinking of Disney age 40, but at the same time, the messages that were sent to you might still be there. So, and I see that all the time. So definitely your money story. If money was not around when you were growing up, you might still want to be holding on to it in a safe way. Similarly, actually, I see with people where it's linked to sort of self-worth, how they feel about themselves. That's that when the money just flows out, it goes out as quickly as possible. Or actually, sometimes also people feeling that they have a responsibility to pay for, everything for everyone else because, they don't have as much, and therefore they put themselves further down the list of prioritizing, say, the investing in themselves in the stock market.
What is one belief that quietly sabotages people who are otherwise very capable?
That it's not for them, I think, quite often. That it's not just an education piece, it's actually that someone like them isn't meant to invest.
And then what does this, financial chaos look like for someone earning over 100K?
Well, I think at that level, your costs have probably gone up quite a lot. You might have small children, nursery costs. You've then lost your funded childcare hours. I think people see the sort of over 100K as some sort of like magical, level. But actually, the people I speak to not going on holiday, they aren't, luxuriating in life. They have got a higher mortgage now because rates have gone up since they probably fixed a few years ago. Small children often. And so the chaos can just be covering costs. Everything's gone up. So, it's just in practical sense, it's not sort of, I'm not saying luxury at that level. Chaos, well, it could just be that often people don't know where their money's going.
Yeah.
So it could just be that they don't know where the money's going and therefore they feel out of control. And then they sort of don't look at their bank at the end of the month. And then they start putting things on the credit card. And then that's sort of a cycle that then starts.
Yeah. And you mentioned maybe their life is becoming more expensive. Maybe that's by choice or on autopilot.
Yeah.
Can you describe a little bit this lifestyle creep that you may see with some of your clients?
Yes. I don't think it's suddenly going from, economy class in the plane to business class. I don't think it's sort of that, although some people do choose to upgrade how they travel. But I think it's small, sort of incremental decisions. Like when none of us are living where we lived when we were 22 and we just graduated, we've all either, chosen to rent somewhere nicer. Maybe instead of being in a group, you're renting on your own, or maybe you've bought somewhere and then you've got a mortgage. So I think we all naturally upgrade little things and make little decisions. But there could be, more frequent eating out, or there could be the nicer holidays, clothes even, like what people choose to wear. And then I think the category of just convenience comes with a cost. So I see the spend on, anything that helps with convenience. I had one family spending over £3,000 a month on Deliveroo. So we've actually replaced them with a private chef delivering all the meals, and it's cheaper.
Wow.
So I actually love that part of what I do. Just improving, that is financial, but it also has improved their life massively because they've now got food they like. It's healthy. It's delivered. They can take packed lunches in, and it's not a stress. Parents don't have to worry about the food side of things.
Yeah, no, I love the convenience because I think it often feels like, a guilty pleasure almost to pay for convenience. But when you have money, it's probably where it's, really helping with regaining some of your time also.
Totally. And I see it with the women I work with in particular, where they are still doing a lot of the jobs at home because they feel they should. So I often delve into the sort of shoulds that people hold because, things like getting a cleaner and working out the cost of having someone chop up fruit and veg for you if that's what they want, or changing the bedding, or making sure that stuff's sorted for the children. Those things I'm seeing people do where they're C-suite level, executive level, and they're doing it at sort of 11 p.m. at night when it's quiet, and they are basically exhausted. So if you think about the cost of outsourcing, I really strongly encourage people to do that for their sanity.
Yeah. So when they come to you and they think, I need to reorganize my finances, I have some money sitting there, or I'm maybe like spending it all. How do you start the work with them? Do you have like a structure or system that you put in place?
Yeah. So I now give a financial MOT.
Yeah.
They send me the last 12 months of bank statements, credit card statements, and it is so great because you get to go straight into the data and seeing the behavior, which often the people don't even know themselves. So it's not that they would hide it from me, but they just weren't even aware that Monday they spend 3 times as they do any other day of the week, and then we can get straight into digging into why is that happening, getting them to think about what happened in childhood or what's sort of running, what scripts are running in the background. So I basically start with reviewing the finances and think about how they actually feel about themselves, because most people I work with have no one saying well done to them.
Yeah, that's so interesting.
And I think then where you seek external validation is very linked to how you are with your money. So you might find yourself sort of paying for everything for people in a hope that you get some sort of validation back, which is, not the place you want to be in. So if you can actually start building yourself up, I always encourage people to sort of say each day what they are proud of doing for themselves so that they're not having to look externally for that validation. And that has a significant impact on how they are with their money. I always get text messages sort of saying, you'll never guess what, this has now changed in my life, and it's not to do with money, but actually they end up, firmer boundaries, or they end up getting a promotion or a pay rise just because outwardly they are presenting differently. So I feel it's a bit sort of Mary Poppins-esque because it's not really about the money, even though money is why people come to me.
Yeah. And then, maybe one anecdote on that. Someone was telling me, if I'm having a coffee with someone, if I'm having lunch with someone, dinner, I always pay for them and I just can't help. Where does that come from?
Well, it can be because deep down you think you should. The person will like you more, or they might not like you if you ask for it back. And I think people often imagine something that's not there. If you say, I'll get that, it's not very particularly British. It's not very British to talk about money. So you might just say it's easier, I'll pay. And then you're not going to say, can I have £4.50 back, please? Choose to pay for someone's coffee. But I think if you're constantly doing it where you're going out for dinner with someone and you always cover it, that's where you need to sort of look and see, why am I doing this? Because I think there'll be something deep down that's you're either seeking that person's validation or you think that there's an obligation, which is probably in your head.
That's interesting. This episode is sponsored by Wealthify. Want to start investing but not sure where to begin, or perhaps you don't have the time to manage it yourself? Well, Wealthify makes it simple by choosing and managing your investments for you. And if you deposit or transfer into their stocks and share ISA, you could earn between £50 and £1,000 in cashback. Open your account at wealthify.com. Terms and conditions and minimum investments apply. Registration closes on the 31st of May 2026. With investing, your capital is at risk. Wealthify is authorised and regulated by the Financial Conduct Authority. So let's say you've looked at the, statements for the past 12 months.
Yeah.
I guess next is thinking about goals or budget. Where do you start?
Well, then I go to what actually matters to you. What are your values? Yeah. That's not a one-off exercise. I actually did it 2 years ago, and then 2 weekends
ago, difficult.
I asked Claude to take me through one at a time, one question at a time, to question and see were the values I came up with 2 years ago still accurate. And actually they did change slightly, but it's a really good exercise to do because it then makes it much easier to say yes or no to something, where you're spending your time, but also where you're spending your money. So it sort of starts off with the, spending, money story, values as sort of the first 3 activities, and then kind of working out what you actually need to spend, fixed costs, what you want to spend. I find a lot of people I'm working with don't actually have much joy or pleasure in their life. So it's making sure you've actually allocated something for that it's safe to enjoy yourself, that it's okay to put yourself higher up the list. Yeah. So although that then starts to be about the numbers, it's taken kind of a few steps to get to the numbers, because I think it's so important doing that earlier bit of work. So you can start thinking about a spending plan. I always encourage people to think about what comes up in the year as well, because we might know what's happening on a month-by-month basis, but there's always going to be a month where there's a wedding or holidays, birthdays, and then you end up, there's suddenly, an extra £600 that's needed. If you can map out over the next 12 months where those bigger amounts are coming out, you can start putting aside for them as you go. And then it almost feels like it's sort of free when you get there because you put it aside, rather than then feeling on the back foot. Because I've noticed that it's that feeling of being hit by a higher cost that then sort of sends people backwards into a bit of a spiral, or saying, I'm bad with money, which I never want people to say. I always want them just to say it's something I'm learning about, something I'm, doing my best with, trying to sort of reframe it. So kind of not just a monthly spending plan and budget, but adding in what's happening for the year. So that's sort of good. And then obviously we start thinking about short-term, medium-term goals, and, just thinking, if you could wave a magic wand, how would life be? And it's really interesting. I've noticed you can actually get there a lot quicker than you think. I think a lot of people will say, oh, that's something I'll do in retirement, or maybe they kind of give it some random, 10 years time. But actually you can change things quite quickly if you want to be more intentional with what you're doing, and get there quicker.
So is this like saving harder for one of these goals, or reaching, I guess for high earners, it's this idea of early retirement that's quite appealing. Do you see that with some of your clients?
It's funny because I think a lot of high earners actually like working hard. So, I mean, not all, but they won't retire in a traditional sense. They'll probably just do something different. And so that's where I quite like encouraging the entrepreneurial mindset. I would never 15 years ago or even 5 years ago have said I'd run my own business.
Yeah.
What a risk. I'm a sort of safe little squirrel. Normally I would have thought, it's great going up the rungs, getting a pay rise, that sort of thing. But actually being able to build something yourself, have the autonomy to build something yourself, as long as it's going to, viably work financially. So I'm seeing that actually more than just necessarily wanting an early retirement and stopping work, because I just think, and it could be who I attract but I don't see people suddenly going off and just sort of relaxing 24/7, because I don't think it's how people are wired.
Yeah. But it's also maybe imagining another life. So maybe building a business, having a portfolio career, spending more time with, I don't know, with your children, traveling. But it's hard sometimes to see that if you don't have people around you that have been going through these like big life transitions and changes.
Oh, definitely. I was part of a leadership course at work, and we were asked to do a vision board of what leadership looked like for us. We were told to do it on PowerPoint, and I sort of put about 4 things on this slide. It was like our homework. And then I just did this other one that was like, what if Philly Financial, I was doing it full time. And within about 9 months, I had every single thing I'd put on that vision board.
Wow.
Except for doing a podcast. Being a guest, but not. But it's amazing how I had sort of flexible term time working, like have help with childcare, but just the ability to have that flexibility and just time to go outside each day, time to play tennis. I literally have had pictures and words that were so specific, and they were really normal day-to-day things, like time to prepare fresh food. Because when you're busy and you're working full time and you've got small children, and I was doing my social media stuff on the side, you have so little time and you get so tired. But I think if you're high achieving, you always want to still do your best at everything. So I just was so specific, and I encourage my clients to do that too. Get really specific about what they want, and it's really in the day-to-day things, because you can start building in some of these day-to-day things much sooner than you think if you actually write it down.
Yeah. And you need the headspace maybe to be able to also think about these things and not be, full-time.
Yeah.
You never have time to think about these things. So
no, and that's actually sometimes what the time having the coaching with me allows for. So, once they make the decision that they want to think about it and take the time, then they make the time. But it has to be a conscious effort. Otherwise, it just goes on the to-do list and they think it's not possible.
You mentioned childcare. So I think that's an interesting topic. You've been talking a lot about it on socials also. Can you explain the childcare cliff at around 150K and why it matters?
Yes. So there is a cliff edge with funded childcare hours when you earn over £100,000 net adjusted income. That term is troublesome for a lot of people because it includes things you receive through work, like benefits in kind, interest that you get from cash in the bank, if you get a bonus, so you could have a base salary of 85,000, but then maybe get a share through your company that vests, or, and it can all add up. You can put money into your pension and it comes off. But essentially that 100,000 net adjusted income number just is whether it means you either get the funded childcare hours or you don't. So I had a lady last week who had twins. Her bonus put her in up to 102,000. For her nursery for the year, it was either £9,000 for the twins or £36,000 for the twins, whether she had the funding or not. But she'd only gone over by £2,000. When you earn over £100,000, you also start then losing your personal allowance. So not only was she losing those funded childcare hours, but she was also being taxed the additional 20% on the bit over that 100,000, which is why we say that's 60% marginal rate of tax.
So what can you do when you're in this situation?
The main lever is putting money into your pension to bring it back under, which is what we then learned to do. Because the thought of 9,000 versus 36,000 pounds, I always think having twins, wow, what a blessing, but also what a cost. So
how do you approach these conversations around, I guess for young couples who want to have children or those who have young children, because in the UK, there's different systems, but the cost of childcare is one of the most expensive in the world. And then how do you think about education, private, public education, and maybe even like university and fees?
I think there'll be very few paying for private school fees who do not have, either grandparent help or a very, very high salary. It's just such a high cost. Although if you look at the cost of nurseries, if you're paying full price, often it's equivalent to private school anyway. It's just whether you want to keep that strain on your household finances. I'd always encourage people to see it as a household cost. Too often I see the women saying, oh, there's no point me returning to work. I'm basically just paying for childcare. And I understand, because traditionally it would have been the woman who wasn't working and therefore they were at home with the children. But it really annoys me because it's a child of two parents and therefore it's a household expense.
And now what about, pensions, tax thresholds? What are the things we have to have in mind? So for those who are approaching these like higher earning brackets, what are maybe the key numbers or key levels that we have to think about?
Yeah, so I would always encourage people between 100,000 and 200,000 to put as much into their pension as possible, because you can put up to £60,000 in a tax year. That includes what your employer puts in. But then you start a bit like you start losing the personal allowance when you go over the 100,000. It's the same between the 200 and 300,000, that ultimately by the time you're earning 310,000, you can only put 10,000 into your pension. And most people say, why did I not know about this? But because it's such a niche thing, not many people in the UK earn over 300,000. So it's not something that's very widely discussed. But that tapering down of what can go into the pension is a big one that people wish they'd known about. Between earning, say, 100 and 200,000.
Yeah. And when you think at goals, so you've talked about pensions, but what about more, general investing? If you have cash savings, or maybe you inherited money, you have money sitting there. How do you approach investing with your clients?
So I'm no longer a regulated investment manager. So anything I do is educational. So it's just letting them know about the 20,000 that you can put into the stocks and shares ISA, investments in the pension, and then also just a general investment account too, that it's okay to have money in a taxable account. Tax is not the enemy. You're paying capital gains tax on gains. So again, that's where there's sort of the mindset work that needs to come in within investing, because the amount of people who just sort of tax, but actually it's, if you can frame it as this is tax on your winnings and it's 24%, so you're still keeping 76%.
It's on the money you made. Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah.
In terms of, when we usually talk about investing, we said you need to have your emergency fund. You also save for short-term goals. You repay, short-term debt. Is the message different for high earners in terms of how much money you should have in your emergency fund, for example?
I always think this will come down to individual preference of risk tolerance, and also perhaps where they are in their career, because someone closer to retirement might want 2 years worth of emergency fund or peace of mind fund, to cover costs. I always think about how quickly you could earn that money again as well. So, or actually, I encourage people to think about worst case scenarios and what would actually happen, because I think some people love to hold on to cash because they think it's really safe. But if the worst case happened, who would be around you who could help you?
Yeah.
And would you really need as much as that? So some people are comfortable with 3 months and some people want 24 months. It will just really depend on who they are as a person and then also, their risk tolerance.
Yeah. And before we talk about like maybe women specific, saving for children, that's a question we often get. I think that's also a nice way to, save some money for the long term. What are the different options that people could look into?
Before I answer that, I'm just going to say a slight bugbear of mine. I get a lot of people asking, how can I start investing for my child in their junior ISA? And I always say, are you doing your own first?
Yes.
Because this, I think, links back to the where are you in the order of who you're kind of prioritizing. And it's okay to put money in your own ISA first. Yeah. I invest in my children's junior ISAs, but that's after my husband and I have filled our stocks and shares ISAs. I think it's very important that, almost like that, putting your own oxygen mask on first. If you are building wealth, you've got options, you've got choice to give to your children. But if you have made sure you're doing something for yourself, then options for children is the junior ISA, which is what I do for my children. And you can put up to £9,000 a year. but you can also put in a few £100. Anything you put in is going to compound and grow. I think a stocks and shares junior ISA is a better option personally. Obviously, you've got to be happy with risk in the market, but usually you've got the long time frame till 18, and encouraging them to keep it invested beyond 18. It just doesn't need to suddenly come out then. And then some people choose the self-invested personal pension, the junior SIP. I just don't think it's very fun. The idea of not waiting till
Thinking
you
about
might not even be
retirement.
alive by the time they come to get it. But obviously, it will help them. But I think the junior ISA is more accessible sooner. So
I've had a lot of questions, emails from women who are the main breadwinner in their families. What do they maybe underestimate about money? I mean, we don't talk about money. I think, as women, especially you're the main breadwinner, if you have a family, you have children, that's a lot to think about. So where could they start? Any specific guidance for them?
I always think to have the conversation at home about contribution. So I think it's hard not to get resentful. So if you have conversations at home, it can be very helpful about expectations generally in the household, not just about money, but about how they make decisions and wanting things to feel fair. I think it can be quite a burden if you feel it's all on you. So just again voicing it before it becomes something that causes real strain, I think.
And in terms of finances, also something we often discuss. And I was speaking at a corporate talk a few weeks ago, and someone asked, but should I keep my finances under my own name, or do we have like shared finances and shared accounts? What's your view on that?
I think once children are involved, it's a really good idea to have the bulk coming into a joint account, and then separately having, your ISAs will always be in your own name.
Pensions.
And pensions will be in your own name. And I think, there's no harm in having something that is your own. But I see with money that more typically goes out of a household pot than you think. So it's better having more going in jointly so that there's not sort of an additional strain on one party. And that is, again, where you think there's resentment. And I think where I see people saying, well, he pays for the holiday, I pay for the nursery, both sides end up feeling like they end up paying more. And, that can't be true. So I think it's better to have everything coming out centrally. And then, you both decide what you want to then each individually enjoy as like the surplus. And I know some people say, I don't want them to see how much I'm spending on their birthday present. That's fine, take that separately. But for the main part, I think to keep things fair, having a joint account is a good idea.
We've talked a little bit about pensions, how to make sure both partners contribute into a pension when, someone maybe is taking some time off to take care of their children, for example.
Yeah, really, really good point. So two things around that, actually. One is to make sure that the person who's taking the time out is claiming for child benefit, even if their partner's earning over the threshold, to make sure that they're getting the credits towards their state pension, for one. And then point two is that they can still have money put into a pension for them. The gross amount is 3,600, so that can still go in, and that will at least be something that is building. I would also encourage money into the ISA for them as well, because that's accessible before retirement age and can often act as a bit of a bridge or buffer.
Yeah, a bit more flexible.
Yeah. Exactly.
And in terms of approaching risk, investing, that's a conversation we often have on this podcast. Do you feel your level of earning or income will affect the level of risk you want to take with your money? And more generally, how do you feel women are approaching this topic of investing?
So I think there's a bit of a misconception that women are low risk or aren't risk takers. And I think there is evidence that, we like to keep some money as cash because we are often the one at home who thinks, regardless of working or not working, just that feels that the nest needs to be safe with some money. But I think once women learn about investing, all the studies show better return, and I think it's because they don't go and sort of tamper with what things are invested in. They make their decision, it goes in, and then they kind of keep adding to it. generalization, but I think that is a misconception that they aren't risk takers. I think it's just around once there's education around it, then they are willing to take on risk. The question around if you are a higher earner, would you take on more risk? I don't think it's correlated. Although to have got to a higher salary level, you may naturally be someone who takes more risks and puts himself forward. But I don't think it's necessarily linked.
Amazing. I have 3 quick-fire questions for you.
Okay.
One thing high earners should stop doing immediately.
Feeling like they should be paying for everything.
One thing they should start doing this month.
Get clear about what they actually want and start being intentional with time, money, and energy.
What does being good with money actually look like?
Well, I don't like to give it a good or a bad value, but I think ultimately feeling calm around money decisions. I feel confident that I can spend on something because I know that the money's there. I don't want to have to be kind of looking through spreadsheets and feeling very constrained around money. So I think to be good with money is actually knowing that you've been intentional with it, it's going where you want it to go, it's in line with your values, and you feel calm around it.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Philly, for joining me today.
Thank you.
Thank you for joining us today on The Wallet. You can subscribe on YouTube or your favorite podcast platform. We also share short clips on social media at Vestpod, and you'll find the key takeaways and resources from this episode at vestpod.com. If you'd like to go deeper, subscribe to the Vestpod newsletter via the link in the show notes for practical money insights, episode summaries, and updates on upcoming events.